Good morning, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple of seconds while we finish loading up all the participants. So just sit tight for about another 30 seconds or so, and we'll get started with our webinar today. Okay, people are signing in. Looks like we've got a great group this morning.
We need elevator music. Because nobody wants me to sing, trust me.
We need some not elevator music. We need some dance tunes just to kind of
see what I can pull
get
up.
Everybody going. But we're going to get started anyway. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. You are attending the Business Support Series webinar offered by the Halifax Chamber of Commerce. I'm Patty Dow, and I am the Member Services Specialist here at the Chamber and your host for this morning. I think most of our organizations will say that their strength is their people. And hiring and the entire HR industry has evolved quite a bit over the last few decades. Our guest this morning, as our guests this morning put it, it started in the early days of admin support roles, and that has transformed and evolved into a seat at the leadership table. We want to thank everyone for submitting your questions to the presenter ahead of time. And we ask that if you have any further questions, you can put them in the Q&A chat box towards the end of the presentation, and we will get to them. Our presenter this morning is Christine Isnor. My apologies. Christine Isnor with Ingage HR. Christine has been providing HR guidance to emerging small and medium-sized organizations in Atlantic Canada for more than 20 years. So welcome, Christine, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. It still hurts my heart a little bit when I hear 20 years because I feel like I haven't aged a day, but there's certainly days when it feels more like 40 years than 20. So thank you, first of all, to the Chamber for having me. And thank you for all the guests that I can't see right now, which is probably a good thing, for joining me today. So I'm talking about something that's pretty near and dear to my heart, and I will be promising you to geek out in HR world on a couple of things that I think are the essential ingredients for really great HR. And that comes from, as Patty had mentioned, that comes from about 20 years of industry experience and some bumps and bruises along the way. So I'm hopeful that what I can share today is of value, and I do hope that we have lots of questions. Please, if you haven't already submitted some, make sure that you do. And I'm going to rely on Patty to make sure that I know all the questions that are being asked, and I'm hopeful that I have the answer. And if I don't have the answer, I'm happy to find it and circle back.
Sorry, Christine, to interrupt. I will be monitoring the chat box. So again, if you have questions, you can post them in the chat box and or the Q&A, and we'll make sure that everything's answered. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Patty. All right, so there's a few things that we're going to try to get through with relative ease this morning. I'm going to give you a little bit of intro so that you have an understanding of the background that I bring to this discussion today. And also, I just want to give you a sense of some of the industries that I've worked in. And really from, the registration point, there is three main categories of focus that I'm going to really drill in on today. And that's planning, that's detail, our favorite, procrastination, and then of course we'll open it up to questions. So keep in mind that I'd like this to be as conversational as Zoom will allow this to be. So if you see something or you hear something that you'd like to dig into a little bit more, or you'd like a little bit more info than provide what I'm providing, by all means, just kind of interrupt or send a note, and I'm happy to kind of deviate to whatever is going to suit the audience best. But from the very get-go, I'd like to kind of introduce myself a little bit. I have a checkered past, as I like to say. I started my grown-up career. I was in the military for 12 years. And for those who know me, they know that that's pretty accurate to some of my personality. But I worked in the Naval Reserve as a very young individual and started kind of dabbling into training and didn't really know the path that I was going to find myself on beyond a 2-year contract with the military. And a friend of mine suggested that because I was interested in training, I might find myself in the role of HR. So I went away, I got the education that I needed, and I started my career working in a really super easy field, in the field of employee relations at a contact center, a very large contact center that was growing. So right from the very get-go, I felt like it was baptism by fire, and really learned at the hands of a lot of really great professionals, but very quickly. And from there, I moved throughout different industries. So I've worked in manufacturing, I've worked in financial industry, I've worked in the media industry. I've worked with one of the large consulting firms, one of the top 5, and I even dabbled a little bit in seaweed, if you can believe that. So it was just over a couple years ago that I decided to branch out onto my own. And really where I spend my time mostly these days is working with young and emerging and growing organizations in Atlantic Canada, and providing some more seasoned and experienced HR advice and support to help them develop programs and a really good infrastructure of their HR to help their companies prosper and succeed in all that they're trying to do. So that's kind of where I have spent the last 20 years of my time, and some of the key takeaways that I would suggest I'm going to share with you today. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter the industry, it doesn't matter the growth, it doesn't matter the size of the organization, because people are always just people. And one of the really great things about the work that I do is it's a very transferable skill set that I have, because no matter the size of the organization, people are really at the helm, and they're really at the front and center of a lot of the successes that companies have. But again, they're also at the helm of a lot of the challenges that organizations have. So, part of the things that I look at is really what is the motivation? And, people just want to have a really good sense of purpose when they come to work. They want to feel like they're valued. They really do want to contribute and grow with an emerging company and feel valued for doing what it is that they do. And I know that sometimes sounds really obvious and that sounds really trite, but we get lost in some of the details, and particularly when it comes to HR, because it's this massive growing beast. And over the last 20 years, as Patty had mentioned in the intro, we've gone from being a very administrative and support type of role to really being a strategic partner with business decisions and the orientation of the culture of an organization and the flow and the work and much of what we do. And there is a lot of energy and time and a lot of money that is spent to make sure that our workforce is happy, engaged, and really contributing to the productivity and success of an organization. But that's the major trend, and that's kind of a theme that I want to thread throughout this presentation today. It really is about just trying to get down to the basics and do the best that you can with what you have, and not necessarily always feeling like HR has got to be this big, ginormous process or department in order to be successfully working for you in your organization. So I'll share with you some of my big pearls of wisdom. And again, I'm probably borrowing way, way heavier than I should in some areas, but these are really mantras that I've worked with over the years, and they really, they resonate with me. They've resonated with some of my clients. So I'm going to share them with you. And one of the big ones that you'll hear me saying often, particularly when it comes to HR, is really begin as you mean to continue. And essentially what that means, and you'll see this again throughout the rest of the presentation, it is about making sure that what you are doing is authentically yours. It's something that you intend to continue to do. It's something that you can make sure that you've got the right resources, you've got the right commitment, and the right intention when you embark on any kind of HR program. Another one that I truly believe in is no one, and sorry, I'm going to use a profanity here, no one plans to do a job half-assed. I know that there are exceptions to the rule, and I know there are some employees that people hire and they are just shocked by the fact that they may not be everything that they had said that they would be in the interview, or that, you know what, their effort just never seems to really come to fruition, and that, you know, their work is always subpar. That's the exception to the rule. Most people, they really do get up every morning with the best intentions in order to do the best job that they possibly can. And it's our job as HR practitioners to help the company steer that talent and steer that intention in a way that's going to be meaningful both to the employee and to the organization. Here's one that always works really great if you're trying to give more work to your HR team, and that's it's easier to assume the worst versus finding out the truth. Now, if I have any HR practitioners on the call today, you'll know what I mean by this. And that's the discussion that happens in the office when you're trying to figure out what the motivation is behind a particular behavior or an email or an activity. It's the time that we spend trying to understand something without actually engaging in a conversation with the individual. And it's something that and I don't know if this is just a humanistic piece or if this is really just what we do when it comes to trying to unravel some of these relationships in business. But realistically speaking, it is much easier to get to the root cause and manage that. As difficult as some of those conversations may be and uncomfortable, than it is in all the postulating and the assumption. I call this kind of like callous work, so that there's a nugget of truth and a nugget of a problem that sometimes if we don't unveil, we end up creating all of this activity and effort and sometimes process or policy around the problem instead of digging right into what the problem is and dealing with that. Authenticity is critical for great HR. One of the biggest pieces that I would say has been part of my success, or at least my happiness in my job, is I'm really true to myself. You'll see that in the slides. You're going to see that in some of the language that I use, that, you know what, having an authentic voice within your organization, whether it's your HR person, whether it's your manager, I would suggest that everyone in your organization should have that level of approachability and authenticity. But from an HR perspective, if somebody's sitting across the table and asking an opinion of an HR person, and they know that they can trust it and they know that they can be candid, you have one resource in your organization that you know will absolutely be truthful and honest with you. And that's a really important piece to have. So again, for my HR practitioners, be your authentic self, be really approachable and realistic with your employees at every chance that you have. And that kind of feeds into the next one. You know, someone may not always remember what you said, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And, you know, even in the most difficult of conversations and even in the termination conversations, there's always room to make sure that a person feels valued. And I know that sounds very strange, but it is entirely possible, as long as you manage with integrity and you really honor the integrity of the other individual. I think that's really, really critical as well. This one is going to be a controversial one, I think, and I believe this. I was talking to a colleague this morning, and it still resonates with me. HR should run silent in your organization. So if you've got really great HR practices, it means that your managers are empowered, your leaders are empowered, and those conversations that need to be had between staff or between peers is happening. It's not having that HR department that people feel the need to run to. It means that the right infrastructures, the right programs, and the right training is in place so that individuals feel very confident to have those more difficult conversations, or they know that they have the processes and the practices to fall upon in order to enable them to do their best work and to manage and lead in the best way that they can. And finally, this is one that I would say that this has been more of a net new learning in the last few years, working more in the startup industry. But culture is formed when more than 3 people work together. So sometimes we think if you're only a small organization, or if you're a startup and there's only a few of you, you shouldn't really worry too much about culture. But I can tell you this, culture does get formed when more than 3 people work together. So the challenge for businesses is definitely how much are you influencing the culture, and how much are you enabling the culture to kind of run its own course. And if you're comfortable with allowing it to kind of unfold naturally, that's fantastic. But being able to influence it, and influence it in a positive way through many different types of HR practices and programs, and we'll talk about those, is really, really integral. And I would say the earlier you can get out and lead the direction of your culture and form the direction of your culture, the less time you spend in the backdrop trying to change or transform it. So again, just keep that in mind as we move forward. So the big thing, and I know everybody has probably heard this, and I'm sure that everybody is probably, very mindful of this after the year that we've had in 2020. If people spent more time planning, particularly planning their human resources, they actually would spend less time talking to human resource people. And, I'm putting a lot of us out of a job by saying that. I appreciate it, but planning really is a key ingredient in managing your human resources. And I absolutely can appreciate, and I understand that people spend a lot of time in managing hiring practices, and how many people that they are planning on hiring, and what the numbers are, et cetera. But I will tell you this, it is just the very beginning when you start thinking about your hiring plan, and we'll dig into a few more of the details with respect to that. We'll talk a little bit about the big hairy beast that is. So it's not just why do you plan, but how do you plan? And the name of the game, particularly today, is about trying to understand how to simplify what can seem to be a big, big, big part of your business. And the human resource practices over the years, as I suggested on the offset, it has evolved tremendously. There's a lot of moving parts to it. There's a lot of research. There's a lot of value add. And sometimes people can get swallowed up in where the best place to start with it is, and particularly where should you be spending your time and your energy and your money if you need to pick just a few pieces. So we'll talk about the core elements of it and really how to dig in best. And then starting at your very own beginning, and what does the beginning look like for your particular business? So why is planning so important, and why is it not just about the hiring? People spend a tremendous amount of time saying, okay, well, we got to consider what our growth is and what our headcount is going to look like and who's retiring. And we talk a lot about the numbers and who we're going to hire for. Some of the things that I've discovered over the last couple of years, particularly, have been that it's not just the number that we're looking at. It really has to be the what are we looking at. So I'm going to start with hiring, but we're going to go down the path a little bit more in some of the different HR practices to understand why other pieces of the planning are important as well. But when it comes to hiring, it's always best to take the time prior to posting, prior to being in this gap period where potentially, we've had somebody resign, or we know somebody's going to retire, and we have this panic that we need to fill that hole. One of the best opportunities that you have in order to really influence the business in a strategic way, and not necessarily just in an ad hoc or reactionary way, is at your hiring principle. And there's 2 reasons. First of all, if you're hiring for growth, sometimes we get into what I call the desk spill approach. And the desk spill approach is, oh my God, I'm so busy. I've got all of these things that I'm not getting to. I'm going to hire someone who's going to kind of pick up the extra pieces or take on the workload that I or someone else can't get to. And although that's incredibly helpful, and although that's going to manage and mitigate the problem that's directly in front of you, I would suggest that the best way to really manage that talent pool that you're really trying to get to a stronger growth position is to take a look at the role itself, and also try to appreciate the talent and the skill set that you'll need or potentially could need, not just in the immediate position, but what value can that position potentially bring, and what resourcing can you bring to a future need? So let me give you an example. If you're in marketing, for example, and you are the sole marketer in your company, and your social media is starting to lag, you're concentrating more on different elements of your marketing plan, and there's pieces that are spilling over. Yes, fill the need of what you can see, but also forecast ahead and try to meet your strategic priorities with, okay, if we hire this person and they have social media experience, we also can look and say, what would be the gap? And what would be the additional responsibilities, attributes, and qualities that we could find in a candidate, so that we are introducing somebody into the organization that will have skill set and capacity, and raise our bar that much more. When we're in smaller organizations, that need to hire is such a critical step, and it's a scary step, especially if it's a +1 or your first 10 people. You want to be sure that your thinking and your process flow is about hiring a little bit more strategically than it is just filling the gap of the spillage as it is right now. The other part is making sure that your HR programs are doing what they're supposed to do. So right now, in the time of COVID, and specifically, we're spending a tremendous amount of time talking about health and safety. We're talking about mental health and mental wellness. Now is it a good time, as should be continuous planning, is your benefits, for example. Are the programs that you have in place, are the programs that you utilized even 5 years ago, are they still relevant? If you're in a co-pay situation, are your employees still utilizing the benefits as you had hoped them to use, and are they still driving value? If you're hearing a lot of conversation in the background about, what I really could use, or this isn't really value add, you've got to wonder whether or not the value for money is really driving the behavior that you're looking for, either in your benefits or even in some of your perks. So think about some of the programs that you may or may not be considering, or you may or may not have spent a lot of time assessing or really understanding. Are they doing what it is that you're hoping them to do? Because sometimes we do a one and done, and we introduce a program and then we let it flow. And over time, either the value diminishes, or it's not contributing in a way, or it's not driving the performance or the behaviors that we're hoping for it to. So spend a bit of time, not just in benefits, but in some of your perk programs, etc. Performance. Planning for performance is one thing that I think will probably get a lot of eye rolls in this conversation, and most likely throughout organizations, because performance management has been this really heated debate in a lot of professional HR circles as to whether it adds value, whether it's an administrative exercise, etc. And I'm a firm believer that performance programming is only as valuable as the conversation that you're having with the individual. So if it becomes too big of a process and not at the core root of having really good conversations between individuals, like your leader, your supervisor, or even peer conversations, then perhaps it's time to take a look and say, okay, are we really assessing appropriately? But right from the get-go, and this is key. We don't spend a tremendous amount of time looking at our onboarding, and the first 17 weeks of a individual's time with an organization are absolutely the most critical time. So if you think about it from a honeymoon perspective, you've got this bright and shiny person that wants to get going, wants to prove their value, and wants to work hard right at the very beginning. So perhaps planning and spending more time in developing a really solid onboarding program, it'd be best value for money. And we'll talk a little bit more about it, but I often talk about like the houseplant mentality, where sometimes we go out, we find this tremendous talent. We're so excited to bring them on board. We give them all the administrative stuff. We give them a little piece of swag, and they've got a pen and a desk and an email address. And we go, all right, see you at the luncheon in 3 days. And if you need anything, I'm just across the hall. But are we really giving them opportunity to perform right from the very beginning? Are we giving them goals? Are we giving them priorities? Are we giving them projects? So planning ahead of time for that new person to come on board absolutely is going to allow them to hit the ground running. And then finally, I talk here about what the culture factor is for planning. And I can't say this enough, and I do get into it in a little bit more detail, but planning really does speak and resonate for an individual and for a culture on how much value you're placing on your employees. How much attention are you spending on your HR practices? How much attention are you spending in order to enable and ensure a person's satisfaction with their job and with their engagement? And if you haven't been paying attention to some of your programs, or if you're not necessarily driving value or contributing or investing in them, sometimes the absence of that planning speaks more volumes than perhaps you know it does. So with all that, how do we tackle this big hairy beast? Because from soup to nuts, HR is the entire employee life cycle. It is the minute that you think about hiring to the minute that they retire, they resign, or you help them resign. So it's the whole spectrum of what happens during that employee life cycle. And it's daunting. It's a whole lot of specialization. It's a whole lot of stuff. It all weaves in together. At some points, you think you nailed down one section and go, you know what, we're getting really good at this hiring process. And now Christine's saying, okay, well, apparently our onboarding now needs work. So appreciate 100% that it's a lot coming at an organization. And it's certainly a lot coming at smaller organizations because they want to get it right as well. So best piece of advice that I can give you is begin with a bird's eye view. And when I say that, I know there's a lot of organizations and really, really good organizations that spend a lot of time getting that bird's eye view through employee engagement surveys. And I'm a huge proponent of an employee engagement survey. I think that's a fantastic way to really do a litmus test to see if the value for money is there and you are spending the right amount of time and the right amount of effort in the right spots. But I'd suggest prior to getting that opinion, you should also be looking a little bit more into your processes versus driving opinion. So that means just getting into the different bits and pieces of the employee life cycle and really doing a bit of an audit and saying, okay, you know, what is working and what isn't working, and where have we been doing it forever and it's not adding any value, or it's stale, or it's not needed, or it needs to change. So really, really looking at the details of the employee life cycle. And there's a slide that I'll show you all the bits and pieces. So really engage into the processes of what it is that you do first, as unsexy as that might be. And it's certainly not something that, you know, people get, well, outside of like the HR geeks like myself, it's not something you get terribly excited about doing when you start looking and saying, okay, do I have the right policies in place? And, you know, do we have the right letters and the right templates? Are we consistent in our application? I know that's very dull, but it's really critical, because when people start becoming complacent and when you start hearing that infamous, well, you know what, we've been doing that forever, or yeah, well, we used to do this. Those are the death knell to actively disengaged employees. So they're telling you something, and it could be very well baked into the processes or the general practice of your HR. If you can, going back to that point about HR should run silent, simplify as much as possible. HR doesn't need to be a big, heavy beast. It just needs to be applicable, and it needs to be driving value. So if, you know, and back in the day, I love to say that because I'm old enough now to say it. Back in the day, it was all about this heavy policing process, protocol, paperwork piece. And now it's really about being nimble and agile and being able to move. And we know this, I hate the word, sorry, pivot, in a way that we're able to be responsive to the work environment, to events outside of our control, etc. So make sure that you simplify as much as you possibly can and find the gaps. And we're going to talk in a little bit more detail about what those gaps are. But first, when I go through an organization and do an HR assessment, These are the 9 categories that I typically look at. And it's, that old saying of, how to eat an elephant. Well, it's easier to do it in bite-sized pieces. So these, when I take a look at the employee life cycle, these are some really critical elements that I take a deep dive into. I see how they're hiring. I take a look at their policies and their process flow to make sure that it's making sense, that there's enough hands in the right places and not too many hands in other places. I take a look and see whether or not training and facilitation is something that they are actively involved in or have a desire to be involved in. Culture is that overarching piece, and sometimes culture in and of itself requires some attention, but sometimes it gets created and all the spaces in between these programs as well. Make sure your compensation is up to market, or at least something that you can afford. Taking a look at your benefits and your perks. You would not believe how important perks are. Perks sometimes make or break your culture, believe it or not. Maybe it's time for a quick review of your organizational design. Maybe your operational HR needs to increase or decrease. Make sure that all of your legal and your compliance pieces are there, because that's where some fires can burn the brightest, and that's usually where the risk will preside in a lot of organizations. And make sure that you understand what your succession plan looks like. So this is kind of how I tackle it when I take on a client. I want to make sure that I'm looking at all elements. And some clients will look at me and say, you know what, let's just hone in on one area. I just want to be absolutely sure we've got this tweaked, or this area is working well. So it's just the sense of having some bite-sized chunks so that you're not trying to take on your entire enterprise of HR. It's just about trying to understand the different pieces that are moving and where to drill down. So where do we start? So mind the gap. And a lot of organizations will think, okay, well, the employee life cycle begins in hiring, so I'm going to spend my time starting there. And quite frankly, if you're not in a position where you're hiring, or if you don't have problems drawing talent to your organization, at the beginning is maybe not your beginning, and you need to understand kind of where your gap is. So realistically speaking, when you take a look through that employee life cycle, where are your fires burning the brightest? Like, where do you hear the grumbling? Where do you see the frustration? Where do you know that people are not necessarily either enjoying a practice or a process? And I'm thinking more about like performance management, for example. And it's okay to start there. The big thing is, if you're starting on any changes or any modification to your HR, you want to have some quick wins. You want to be able to take a look at the processes and say, right, okay, for 2021, this is what we can afford to do. This is what we have the resourcing to do. And this is what we have the engagement and the commitment to do, and drive that. And it doesn't have to be big, and it doesn't have to be multiples. It just needs to be one or two really quick things. And here's a perfect example. If you have a policy, for example, that just doesn't make any sense, but somebody said, well, it's policy, we've always had it in place, and it doesn't make any sense, and nobody follows it, and everybody's doing something that is the exception to the rule. And I'll jump in and say, let's take vacation, for example, because vacation is one of those things in a time of COVID has been probably really challenging. So let's say, for example, you have an old vacation policy that's been in place forever and a day, and you have a good percentage of your folks as an exception to the rule. So in other words, instead of people waiting 3 years to get 3 weeks vacation, some people were onboarded with 3 weeks vacation. It's all over the place, and everybody rolls their eyes and nobody pays any attention. And all your managers are asking HR, okay, well, what do I do in this circumstance? Again, also think in mind with COVID, let's say, for example, that, the policy doesn't necessarily address the fact that you might have people that really didn't take vacation, want to carry over vacation, but your policy doesn't allow it. There's your win, right? So there's a fire that's burning the brightest, and there's your win. There's your opportunity to sit down, take a deep seat, review your policy, and say, okay, we're being responsive. We've heard what you've had to say. We're going to make some changes to our vacation policy. Here's what they look like. And forgive me, I know that's not always easy in some organizations, but if you are planning on making any changes, sometimes it's good to be able to make a commitment to something that is meaningful for folks. And it's a policy, but it doesn't necessarily need to be written in stone forever. And what we found from last year and what we find throughout the years ahead is some of the things that we thought we couldn't do for business, we actually can do in a state where we absolutely need to in order to survive. So for many organizations, as an example, that said that they couldn't do at distance or flex work, et cetera, in the time of COVID, they found that they actually could. So find some of these areas that are really big, bright fires that would be meaningful and make those changes, or at least start to make those changes. But again, make sure there's a few things in place. You have to have commitment. You have to have enough resourcing. And with the begin to mean to continue, you absolutely need to be sure that it's something that you can commit to and drive value for the long haul, not just for a quick and dirty. So just to give you an example, it's probably one of the most contentious examples I can give is vacation planning next to bonus, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole with bonus at this point. But it's an example of where in the processes and the life cycle you can make some changes and add some value in a meaningful way without necessarily blowing up the entire HR practices and processes. So I'll leave that one. I'm sure that there'll be some comment and happy to have some discussion with respect to that as we move forward. So then it's the devil in the details, as I've said. And again, as I just finished saying, whatever gets put in motion has to be maintained, because if you've ever heard, oh yeah, we used to do that, that again is a great big sign of, active disengagement. If what you do cannot be sustained and retained, people will remember. Oh my gosh, will people ever remember? I give this example often. It's about setting expectation in an organization. And I will tell my clients, have I told you the turkey story? I'm not sure what organization that I work with, but my CEO had said, look, I'd like to do something nice. Can you canvass all the staff and see who would like to get a turkey for Christmas? Sure enough. So we went out, we did a survey, and 50% of the staff said that they would like to get a turkey. The other 50% of the staff said they don't really care if they get a turkey. So what we ended up doing is we ended up giving out gift certificates instead of turkeys. 50% of the staff were disappointed because we took their turkeys away. There were no turkeys. People knew that there were no turkeys, but when you set an expectation or when you put a plan in motion, people remember that. So commit. It's really, really important. So again, with the details, make sure that you are able to be consistent and that you are measured in what it is that you do. So it's kind of the under promise, over deliver kind of mentality. Keep it current in details, particularly, and there's a long list of details that are places where details are really, really important. But make sure what you have is current. So if all you can do for your scan or your assessment is take a deeper dive, make sure your benefits are up to date. There's some really tremendously cool benefits that are available. And I'm just thinking health and health and dental. There's healthcare spending accounts now. There's ways in which you can increase optics, and just make sure that they're relative to your staff. Make sure that you look at the market and really try to keep current on the things that you have. Performance management, if you've been using that old form since 1972 and you actually had like a ditto maker, or you had to photocopy or even use an overhead projector, maybe it's time to put it in a PDF. Maybe it's time to take a look at that. So again, making sure that the deep details are really, really accurate to the culture and that they're aligned to the business that you're trying and the culture you're trying to convey is one of those pieces that's really, really value add to HR. Make sure that it's complete. Nobody likes half-baked. And people become very jaded and cynical, and they do the eye roll. And well, we tried to do that, or we used to do that. That's a really important piece. So whatever it is, again, begin as you mean to continue. Whatever it is that you start down that path, make sure you've got a plan. Make sure that you can communicate it. And some of these things are about sunsetting programs that perhaps don't make any sense. If they are that case, you need to communicate the hell out of that. There is so much value in being able to say, folks, we used to do this. We're not going to do it anymore. These are the reasons why. Here's what we're going to do instead. It's about bringing people along and making sure that they understand their why and what it is that you're doing in order to, again, help their culture, help their practice, help them be able to produce and perform in the best way they can. And think it through. That's we get really excited about some things, and sometimes we don't necessarily think about what it would mean if we're a 200-person organization. I worked with a company that they were a startup. They were really excited. They wanted to drive value. They wanted to really, draw a specific talent pool of developers to them. So they offered a 6-week vacation policy for anybody that onboarded with them. The problem with that is they didn't really think through how that would look to be able to meet objectives and timelines with such a small crew of people. So although really valuable to the employees and very, very generous, it actually created more problems in what they were trying to do than solve. And, when you've got a team of 25 people and everybody's trying to get 6 weeks vacation and still meet specific timelines and deliverables, it can be challenging. So again, think it through, and where you can, do, and where you can't, don't. And if you think that you can evolve, make sure that you appreciate the fact that maybe you communicated as an opportunity to review and reevaluate, and again, communicate openly with your staff. Half-baked really does feel half-baked. So, going back to that adage that culture is something that forms. If people feel like you are an organization that stops and starts a lot of things, you're never going to get that buy-in. You're never going to have somebody who is going to be super excited about something. They're going to be super cynical. And trust me, every organization ends up with that one cynic that is just reminding everybody of when things didn't go right, or reminding everybody when programs never came to fruition. So, you know what? Make sure that it's very intentional what you do. You do it with deliberation, you're openly communicating it, and wherever possible, trying to gain buy-in and engagement early. Those are really critical pieces. So if you can't, don't. Explain why you can't. But again, that transparency is really key. Small gestures mean a lot. It surprises me, and it surprises me more now, I think, than ever before, just how much little things matter. Recently had an organization that was thinking about putting in an RSP matching program, and we went out and scanned, and it was a very generous program that they wanted to do. They wanted to make sure that people had some savings for retirement, etc. And what we found is it meant more to have a bonus at the end of the year because some of these employees were working paycheck to paycheck. So, you've got to know your audience, and you got to really appreciate what it is that is their currency before you put in a big program. Make sure that you understand your audience and know what would be meaningful for them. I can't believe I'm saying this because after all these years, but like the little pieces are really important as far as even gift cards. And one client recently, in a time of COVID, they were really worried about what their bonus was going to be looking like and received at the end of the year. Really, really concerned that their client or their employees were going to be disappointed. When we surveyed and had a discussion, they said that really what meant the world to them during COVID was the fact that the manager would come in with coffee every other day, or if they worked later, if they had a stressful day, or if they had to put in an additional amount of cleaning, having a pizza meant the world. So again, not suggesting that that should replace some programs, but it's absolutely something that you need to really appreciate the value of the little details. So bring your A game and flex your muscles. And really, if you have a place where you can start on looking at the details, look at your employment contracts. Make sure that those are accurate and they're up to date and they're reflective of current legislation. One thing that I'm a big fan of, I think this is kind of a split house on this one. It's not very welcoming, but having a termination clause somewhere in your initial agreement is really critical because, It's the same as the prenup. Nobody likes talking about it, but when things start to fall apart, if there is a place that you both have mutually agreed is going to happen as a departure plan, it makes it that much easier. So have a review of your employment contracts and make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and that they're accurate. Onboarding, again, I spoke a little bit about that, just making sure that you have a thorough process there that talks about performance, that talks about what are the expectations in the first 90 days, have a plan for it, have a meeting schedule. Back in the day, we used to talk about termination without cause, and although that still exists, there is some common law practice now that suggests that there is more obligation during that initial performance and probationary review period. So make sure that you have a really robust onboarding program that's good for your employee. That's really, really important for you as an organization. Policies, make sure your policies are up to date, make sure they're thorough, and make sure that they're complete. There's nothing worse than if an employee has to go and dig around, because then sometimes what you have is you have common practice that people just assume. And it's much better to have those things written down and avoid the ad hoc as much as you can. And your recognition, as I just finished mentioning there, just make sure you have a recognition program of sorts, even if it's a $50 budget that a manager may be able to deploy. Make sure you're recognizing your employees in a meaningful way to them. Always, always important. So really, if you've got to dig down into the details and you need a place to start, think legal and think personalized. And if you think about those two as being kind of your weather vane to start with, you'll be in a good position as a place to start with some of your assessment and your review. And finally, last but not least, is our discussion on procrastination. And I will move fairly quickly through this. And I know I'm watching our time here, Patty, so I'll get us through the procrastination piece, because really, who doesn't want to just gloss over procrastination anyway? So procrastination is the reason why HR people have such a great career. It's because if you actually think about that tiny little problem as maybe just being ignored and going away, I would suggest that you would be, you're probably feeding some gremlins somewhere after midnight. And I'm really hopeful that this social reference lands, because if there's people on the call and go, what the hell's a gremlin? You need to Google the 80s and find this, because it is a perfect example of what happens. Just because they're cute doesn't mean that they wouldn't turn on you. And you know what? It's like dating, and you've got your new employee and everything's happy and everybody's getting on, and that's the best time. But I would suggest that if you see a little smoldering fire, or if there's a little pile of things that you're avoiding in the corner, it's the perfect opportunity for them to fester and grow. So if there's something that is on your plate that needs your attention, give it, because there is a difference between talking to an HR pro and talking to a lawyer. And I'm not suggesting that all of them blow up in that fashion. I just, after the years of experience, I would suggest it's never been something where I've heard somebody go, yeah, that really difficult conversation I wanted to have with that employee about their performance, I didn't have it, and everything just went away and everything's working fine now. If anybody wants to challenge me on that one, I'd be happy to hear it, but I can absolutely with certainty suggest you got to eat that frog. And I would suggest you got to eat that frog sooner than later. So I want you to think about it. What's your pile in the corner? Because what you're doing by ignoring it is you're committing yourself to spending more time, energy, and money in the long haul. And then, as we found out, anytime that you delay, anytime that you put off, it diminishes your ability to be adaptable and nimble. Because if you've got to switch the Titanic, and let's face it, 2020 was the Titanic, those companies that were nimble and agile and being able to adapt their business and their business model were the ones that had their employees along for the ride. They had been honest, they had been transparent, they had them with them, and they were able to make these changes in a way that would enable them to be able to pivot. If you haven't created that adaptability and you haven't created that trust with your employees, it's really tremendously hard to kind of pull up stakes and turn left without signaling if you don't have them along for the ride. So procrastination is probably the death knell of adaptability. And finally, regular review and right turns. It's not like it used to be, in the sense that there is plenty of opportunity just to keep reviewing. Even if it's a quick review of something, put it on your calendar, do it over the course of the year and pick away, but make sure that you are continuously reviewing. And if you need to take a right turn, so long as you have ways in which you can talk to your staff and talk to your organization about it, that's okay. It doesn't need to be written in stone, and it doesn't need to be forever. It just needs to be appropriate, accurate, timely, and openly communicated. So with that, I got one more slide, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. See how fast I can talk after too many coffees this morning. All right, so this is the one slide that will tell you everything that I just said, condensed, compressed, and in a nutshell. Assess your current situation and do it from a process lens. I would suggest that your employee engagement survey is useful, but I would rather you dug in, looked at what you had, understood the platform that you were working on before you invite in opinion and review. Identify your big hairy beasts and decide what you can afford to do well, and that's for time, energy, effort, and contribution. Communicate your intentions and have some stick-to-itiveness with that. Make sure that you're able to commit to what you're talking about. Sunset ineffective processes and tell everybody you are. Pay attention to the details, because I can guarantee you other people are certainly paying attention to them. Be attentive and active with your programs and let them change, to what your new needs are. Don't fool yourself that your small nuisance or problem will go away. Make sure you eat the frog. If you can't adapt, if no one is with you. So be open, transparent, genuine, and honest, and get help and expertise and get it early. It's more expensive later. So reach out to your HR person, make sure that they're there to support what you need, and make sure you engage them early. So with that, Patty, 7 minutes. Questions?
Great. Oh, that dog looks just like my girl.
Oh, it's my baby boy.
So thanks so much, Christine. This was an amazing presentation. Lots of really good nuggets for everybody to take away. We do have a few questions. One in the Q&A chat box here is regarding performance planning. So the question is, do you have suggestions on how HR can ensure those conversations are adding value if we aren't participating in the actual discussion?
Okay, so I'm going to assume that this is like your standard annual performance review program, and not another kind of performance discussion.
That's what I would assume as well. Yeah.
Okay. What I find to be helpful to start with is even having a level set, and whether that's like a quick lunch and learn session, something ahead of time with your hiring managers or your people managers, and just setting the expectations and lowering the temperature on timelines. I think a lot of people get so baked into what the forum looks like and what they need to be writing down or when they need to have it done, that what they lose sight of is it's supposed to be a real conversation. It's supposed to get into the meat. It's supposed to be something that you can actually hear what the other person is saying, and not go in with a bunch of preconceptions. So if you have one of those level set lunch and learn sessions just to talk about what the core values are and what it is that the program's supposed to be doing, that's absolutely one. The second one is make sure that they have the pre-planning. So if they have questions or if they have a problem child that they need to talk about or two, make sure that you know who they are, and sometimes reach out, because people don't like to always admit they don't know how to have those conversations. So if you can kind of come to them as opposed to waiting for them to come to you, that just gives them the support that they need. And it just kind of opens the door to the dialogue. And that way you've got a better sense of kind of what are the scary bits that people are avoiding in some of these conversations.
Great. I think we have time for probably one, maybe two more questions. I have some questions that were sent to us earlier. This one, is it more important to hire for fit or to hire for skills?
Oh God, there's just not enough time in the day. 100%
That's
fit.
a loaded question.
100% fit. Fit. Can't say enough about fit. You need somebody to be competent, but if you cannot have a conversation about their performance or their competence, it's tremendously difficult to even try to get them to the next level of their performance. And I want you to think about what the cascade effect is. So if you hire somebody that's highly competent and cannot get along with a soul, or is an inhibitor to your culture, the resonant effect and the permeation of that person's behavior and disposition and demeanor, it can have ripple effects. So fit. I think maybe
Great.
fit.
Excellent. And I think we have time for just one more question. Should every organization, in your opinion, have their own HR rep, regardless of size?
Wow. That's twofold. So there's plenty of organizations that I've talked with that, because they have a really good handle on their HR as far as the practices, they need somebody that they need to just tap on the shoulder once in a while.
Right.
And just to make sure that their policies are up to date, they understand the legislation. Even if they have a question, I think it's really important for somebody to have a resource. Do they need a rep? It all depends on what the strength of the management team is and what the culture is that they're trying to create. So if you've got a management team that's really good at active engagement, they've got time and capacity on the corner of their desk, absolutely. But you know what? It's also important to have somebody who is a pro to tell you, just because of accuracy, because of speed, and because there's a lot of as I said, there's a lot of nuances. So is it baked in that somebody absolutely has to have it? I would say it's really important to have the resource, and what that resource looks and feels like is really dependent on the individual organization, for sure.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think we're pretty much out of time. This has been a great session. Thanks so much, Christine. We are hosting our farewell. Can't even talk. I need more coffee. We have a farewell to Premier McNeil webinar tomorrow. So if you haven't signed up, folks, to join us, feel free to join us tomorrow. Christine, thank you so much. We will have this recording posted on our YouTube channel later this afternoon, so people can refer back to the slides. I'm sure, Christine, if people have questions, they may be able to reach out to you directly
100%.
Through your contact information. And that's it. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Awesome.
And check out the Halifax Chambers/events for all of the upcoming webinars and the events that we're doing here to help support small business in Halifax. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me. Bye now.